cases currently. Today's case is a male in his 30s who has arrived from overseas and is in hotel quarantine. Now turning to what continues to be a fast-moving situation in Sydney. On Thursday afternoon and evening, we made changes to our controlled border for New South Wales. This was because COVID-19 outbreak in the Northern Beaches area of Sydney. Travel from New South Wales into WA was changed to low risk. This meant anyone who has arrived from or been in New South Wales between December 11 and December 17 must self-quarantine until they receive a negative COVID test result. People arriving from New South Wales after December 18 must self-quarantine for 14 days and present to a COVID clinic for testing on day 11. Can I thank everyone for their patience and how they have responded to these changes. In respect of testing, we have been doing thousands of COVID tests in response to these changes. Yesterday, our COVID clinics swabbed 2,479 people. This was on top of the 1,936 people who were tested on Thursday. So that is almost 4,500 people who have been tested in the past 2 days, not including today. In addition, many more tests have been conducted at the free private clinics, and these numbers are still being collated. The COVID clinics handled the extra load very well yesterday, and after initial surge, the queues were well managed and had pretty much disappeared by late morning. But we have continued to increase both the resources at the COVID clinics and extended the opening hours across the weekend. Now to the situation in New South Wales, which continues to be serious and highly unpredictable. The New South Wales government has today brought in new restrictions, with more being flagged. There were 13 new cases from testing in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. yesterday, among a total of 23. 10 of those had already been reported yesterday. The Avalon cluster has grown to 38, with 21 out of yesterday's 23 cases linked to it and another 2 still under investigation. All but a handful of the cases in Avalon have been linked to 2 venues, the Avalon RSL and Avalon Bolo. An Avalon gym is emerging as another potential key site after a patron visited several times while infectious this week. The New South Wales government is expecting more positive cases today. The Northern Beaches is being put into lockdown from 5 p.m. today until midnight on Wednesday. No one is allowed to leave their home except for essential activity. Greater Sydney is now on alert for a similar lockdown. The New South Wales Premier has asked residents to cancel plans and stay home, and flagged possible restrictions from tomorrow depending on what happens today. This is several million people, a massive number of people who have now been asked to stay home across Sydney. I would now like to turn specifically to how we have been handling the people who arrived from New South Wales between December 11 and December 17. This was the period between WA easing restrictions on travel from New South Wales and the subsequent outbreak in Sydney. The core of this group is those people who were living in the Northern Beaches before flying to WA. Yesterday, we put that figure at 87. Today, that figure has been revised to 92 after adding some extra suburbs. Of these 92 travellers, 24 have already returned to the New South Wales. This leaves 68 in isolation in WA. Of those 68, all of those 68 have now been contacted by the Department of Health contact tracing team, and they have all been tested. 26 have returned a negative COVID-19 test result. Results are pending for the remaining 42. So the assessment of this group from the Northern Beaches in WA is well and truly under control. Our emergency team met at 8 a.m. this morning after receiving the latest update from New South Wales. Based on the current health advice, we are not making further changes at this point. People arriving from New South Wales will need to self-isolate for 14 days and be tested at the airport and day 11. But I must stress that this situation could change, and it could change at any time. There will be another meeting of Australia's Chief Health Officers this afternoon, and we will take further advice after that meeting. I know this makes it difficult for people, but we need to be extremely cautious. The COVID-19 situation in Sydney is very fluid and potentially widespread across Greater Sydney and beyond. We will continue to monitor the situation extremely closely, and we will do whatever is needed to keep Western Australia safe. Any questions?
Can I clarify, so you talk about the Northern Beaches testing, and 92, 27 went back, so 68, and of those 68, 26 have come back negative, and the rest, the results haven't come in. So everyone's been tested, right?
That's correct.
Of those 68, but what of the overall figure? How many people are in WA from New South Wales from the 11th to the 18th, and how many of those were tested? Well,
there's around about 4,900. We obviously directed all those people to present to the COVID clinics between Thursday and some of those will probably be tested today. They have till midnight tonight to get their tests. So and obviously we're already expecting to see those results emerge, particularly from Thursday and Friday. And pleasingly, we haven't had a single positive case at this stage.
All right, so you've got 4,900 or more, including Northern Beaches. They've all been directed to test. So you don't know how many of those 4,900.
Look, we're drilling down in terms of that information, but obviously we will be seeing those test results come through over the next 24 hours. So again, pleasing that at this stage there's no positive results.
You say no hard border, obviously, yeah, and by hard border, my understanding is that means quarantine and an exemption with that.
That's correct.
What do you think of the New South Wales Premier? Pretty well saying that all state leaders should consider their decision making. We ask people to be measured in their response, and she's basically pleading with states not to close their borders. What would you say to the New South Wales Premier?
Well, look, our priority is and always has been the safety of the Western Australian community. We'll continue to receive advice from the Acting Chief Health Officer, Dr. Paul Armstrong, in relation to this developing scenario or situation in Sydney. And we understand that may mean that difficult decisions have to be made, and we understand that will be inconvenient and distressing for some members of the public. But we make these decisions based upon the best health advice and to keep Western Australians safe.
What is the likelihood of a hard border coming into play from here?
Well, I think today is a crucial day. Pleasingly, we're seeing more information come from New South Wales in terms of their investigations of understanding the source and the nature of any outbreak, of this outbreak. But this morning's result of those 13 new cases, I think, was pleasing in the sense that we're not seeing an escalation. But if we do see an escalation in the near future, we'll have to act.
What does an escalation mean?
Well, so typically what you would see you'll recall the situation in Victoria where you see a number of cases one day, a growing number next, and then extrapolation. So 13. So we had 10 new cases yesterday, 13 today. So that's not an explosion, but obviously we're going to monitor that situation very carefully. In the event that we do see an escalation in those numbers, and particularly in the event that we see those numbers starting to occur outside the Northern Beaches area, we'll be needing to act.
Will police be monitoring the 42 that haven't got their results back? Are they checking that the premises are okay and up to standard?
Yeah, police do two pieces of work around home quarantining. One is those who use the G2G Now app. They are checked in on digitally and have to register their position on a regular basis, and we are conducting physical checks on all other home quarantine members of the community.
The AMA is going for a uniform approach to the border restrictions. If all of the states have different rules, are we opening the door to border jumping? Say someone from New South Wales driving into Queensland, coming to WA. I know they have signed a stat deck, but
they do. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
what's the likelihood of someone lying on
Yeah, well, look, I mean, obviously, if people want to break the law, they may choose to misrepresent their movements on that declaration. But each state has its own measures in place, consistent with their own circumstances. In Western Australia, people say we've had a unique approach to this, and we've now had 252 days of no community spread of the disease. That's an outstanding result for the WA community, and we'll continue to make sure that we take the steps that we believe are necessary, consistent with the health advice, to keep Western Australians safe.
What consequence can those people face if they are breaking the law to border jump?
Well, a breach of your quarantine arrangements, it represents a $1,000 fine. If you misrepresent your position or your circumstances in relation to that declaration, I think the fine is around about $50,000. That goes also for people who do not who misrepresent their situation on their contact registers when they go to a venue, and those who don't maintain the contact registers, the venue managers can be fined up to $250,000. There are significant fines and measures to enforce these arrangements.
So is that for the scanning and the COVID?
That's correct,
So
yes.
venue managers can face 250.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a serious situation. We require everyone to do the right thing.
Do you have a number of how many West Australians have downloaded the Safe WA app? And are you confident people are using it?
Look, we've had a fantastic response in relation to the Safe WA app. To date, we've had 1.1 million people have downloaded the app and are obviously using it. 28,000 businesses have registered in relation to the app, and today, just today, we've had over 140,675 people. Just so far today, have scanned themselves into a venue. Cumulative scans since the mandatory arrangements came in on the 5th of December, we've had almost 7 million people scan or register themselves as they go through those QR code arrangements.
We've heard anecdotally that some people haven't been using the system, and the people have been very relaxed about not being restricted. So in venues,
Yep.
are you confident that it'll work and that people are abiding?
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves in saying that it has been warmly and enthusiastically embraced by the WA community and the WA business community. But obviously, occasionally you will find a situation in which people don't do the right thing, and we just simply ask that people do the right thing. We're all in this together. Everyone utilising the QR codes and downloading the Safe WA app, it goes to making sure that we keep each other safer.
Are police checking, for businesses that haven't registered or things like that for the Safe WA app?
Look, the arrangements we have for businesses in terms of all our COVID safe plans is usually done through environmental health officers that are engaged by the local government authority. They're our eyes and ears on the ground, and they, as part of their normal rounds of checking on venues, particularly hospitality venues, in terms of their environmental health regime, they check on their COVID safe arrangements as well.
Has there been any feedback from them? Are businesses pretty happy to install it, or what's their kind of feedback?
Yeah, I haven't had any direct feedback, but all the feedback we do get is that it's going extremely well.
Well, do you know how you said 4,900 were directed?
Around about 4,900, yeah.
That we know
Yep.
kind of arrived in the last couple of weeks. They're not being told to compulsorily test themselves, are they?
Well, yes, all arrivals from New South Wales since the 11th of December have to test. And that's why you've seen that big rush of people to our COVID clinics over the last couple of days.
I mean, it's a good sign. I know it's early days and you're monitoring today over the weekend, but so far you must have a slight sense of relief that hasn't shown, because I know certainly from the channels that I travel in, the concern is that how many of those 4,900 have been walking around with COVID.
Yeah, that's right, and that's one of the big dangers of this disease. I was waiting with bated breath for the acting chief health officer's numbers this morning. The fact that we've had no positive cases out of that cohort so far is really pleasing.
I know questions have been asked, but just to clarify, you've obviously the regs said to put a hard border up for obvious reasons. what's your thinking in regards to what would have to happen before you started to think about a hard
Okay.
border for New South Wales?
Well, let me emphasise that at this stage we don't at this point in time see the need to go further than the current arrangements we have. But if we see the situation change, we will put on a hard border. We are ready to put all those measures in place if it's required and if the advice suggests that it is. Clearly, an escalation in numbers will be an important part of that analysis. Also, an understanding in terms of any further outbreaks outside the Northern Beaches area. But we will wait for the advice and we will receive some more this afternoon following a meeting of the AHPPC and make further decisions.
I just want to go back. So just,
There you go.
I just want to continue on the line that I started, which is, and I keep harping on about the New South Wales Premier, because she's been particularly not against but critical of our policies in WA. You know, it's been said that they were the gold standard, and certainly Morrison just talked about that at length. Again, I just want to come back to that question about, you know, should she be minding her own business?
Well, look, all I'd say is look at the scoreboard. Look at the scoreboard in terms of how well Western Australia has managed the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that we've not had any community spread for so many days now, over 250 days, is a real sign of how successful we've been. I think people should pay attention to the fact that because we've looked after the health of Western Australians, our economy has recovered much faster and much more aggressively than any other state economy, and that's one of the reasons why we believe that we have the right approach. In relation to the Premier of New South Wales, obviously they're in an anxious situation, and I've spoken to the Minister for Health in New South Wales on several occasions over the last few days. They are doing everything they can and acting in accordance with the health advice. We're doing the same, and obviously we'll make sure that we respond in a way which is suitable for Western Australia.
I mean, I'm sure you don't want to spoil Christmas. There's been a lot discussed about Christmas and families, and anyone would agree that it's going to be heartbreaking if you were intending to arrive, you know, right now, and you're going to have to be in quarantine. I just want to clarify, if you come now to WA and you have to go into quarantine, you can still do it if you can prove that there's an isolated area, whatever. You can do it at home, can't you?
That's right, and so I mean, obviously, anyone that comes in today or tomorrow, they're already aware that we have our new arrangements in place in terms of having to home quarantine and to get yourself tested at the airport and on day 0 and day 11. But yeah, you can do that if you can do that in a way which means that you can stay separate from the rest of the people in the home. Obviously, that's a great situation, and we encourage people to be able to take advantage of the flexibility of those arrangements. But I just want to make sure people are aware that those coming into New South Wales today are aware of the current arrangements, but we may need to change those arrangements depending on the situation as it evolves. And we know that creates difficulty in relation to Christmas. We don't like making these decisions, but we make them based upon the best possible advice and to keep Western Australians safe.
And they'll have to pay, if they have to go into a hotel, they'll have to pay for it, right?
That's correct.
And with the hard border, will there be a grace period in case people are over east? Will you give them a couple of days to get home with the hard border?
Look, that's normally the arrangement we have, but obviously we'll examine that situation if we're confronted with having to make that decision. We'll continue to monitor it though, and obviously today is an important day. Sorry, Ivan.
For West Australians who are over on the East Coast, I suppose that if they have proof, right? Will the government consider this move? I just come up with ideas to, if they have proof of their address, of their current address in Western Australia, should they be allowed to come home?
Well, look, the police manage the border arrangements. They take a compassionate and common sense approach in relation to exemptions, but obviously if the situation requires and we need to put up the hard border again, we will do so.
So we touched on a lot of change. We touched on a lot of change obviously happening at the moment. Is there any chance the conditions could change for that cohort that arrived between December 11 and 17? Is there any chance that they would have gone into quarantine over the Christmas period?
Look, I think the situation at the moment suggests that we have the arrangements for that group pretty much, the settings for that pretty much right. we'll need them to require them to test again on day 11, just as a precautionary arrangement. But we've seen no reason why we need to put extra measures in place in terms of that cohort.
The meeting this afternoon, what specifically will be talked about?
Oh, well, obviously the AHPPC, which is the national body of all the chief health officers around the country, meets regularly, and as these situations occur, it meets more regularly. So we're aware that they have another meeting this afternoon where they will obviously get briefing from the chief health officer in New South Wales. They will discuss it amongst themselves in terms of any questions or observations and further information that they might need, and then each of them will advise their state governments subsequently in relation to what decisions they need to make.
Yesterday the Premier mentioned that New South Wales wasn't acting quick enough. Are you happy with the response now in terms of lockdowns?
Well, look, obviously the measures that were announced by the New South Wales Premier are very important ones. As I said, I speak regularly with the Minister for Health in New South Wales. He's advised by some great people, but we observed the situation in South Australia and just how quickly they got on top of the situation. They moved quickly, they moved decisively, and as a result of that, they got the situation in South Australia under control very quickly.
But is it too late for New South Wales, or is it, have they acted quickly now?
It's never too late, and obviously we're keenly observing to see what next measures they take.
Roger, we've got amazing figures.
No,
Sorry,
yeah.
my apology. You go.
So are we likely to see a result for the 42 still pending?
Look-
Sorry, by the end of today?
Oh, look, maybe by the end of today. Yeah, obviously, those numbers are still flushing through the system. Look, we're not anticipating there being any problems in relation to that. Speaking with the acting chief health officer today, none of those people reported that they had been to any of those venues that you would have seen put up in the New South Wales government's alert system. So we're not anticipating any positive results out of that group, but obviously they are our focus at the moment.
And obviously you'll be releasing the whole results for the 4,900, obviously. I mean, when I say releasing, obviously, if there's others that are being caught up in that.
You'll see those results come through over the next 24 to 48 hours, and let's hope that none of those are positive.
Roger, we've got amazing figures. I mean, you talk about 252 days.
I think it's 252.
Of non-community transmission, and a lot of that was while we had a hard border. And obviously, WA, the government was criticised for that. According to health advice, they relented on that, and we find now a situation where pretty well, if it hadn't been for clusters over, I mean, you'd be able to come to WA pretty well from anywhere, apart from SA at the moment, with a temperature check, etc., etc. I mean, does this kind of highlight how much more vulnerable we now are in WA, given that the hard border isn't up?
Well, look, we're not vulnerable, but obviously in Western Australia, because we have had such a good result in terms of any outbreak, it has the potential to take hold. That's why we have our G2G app, which means that we have line of sight of everyone that comes into the state, and means that we can contact them quickly, such as we did around that New South Wales cohort. We also have our contact registers utilising the Safe WA app, and that gives us complete digital line of sight in terms of anyone that's come in contact with that particular venue. All these measures are in place, in addition to our current restrictions, to make sure that we stay safe as a community.
Can I just
Yeah, one more, and then over to Ivan.
I just want,
You can go first, Joe.
I just wanted to on the COVID thing.
Yep.
A couple of events. We're always into our cricket and footy here in WA. But the Big Bash beginning of Jan, I think there's
Yep.
4 matches. Have you set the parameters for crowd restrictions at Optus for those games, Roger?
Look, there is already restrictions in place, but we continue to be advised from the Public Health Emergency Operations Control Centre, the FEOC, in relation to those measures. Look, our focus at the moment is on New South Wales, and obviously we're just trying to get on top of that situation first.
Is it half? Is it still at half to 50%?
Look, I'm not exactly sure what the I think it's 50% at the moment, but I'll need to get back to you with more accurate information in terms of the current arrangements.
And so therefore, silly question, we throw to March next year when the footy starts. you can't possibly know whether we're going to be at 100% or 50% or 20%.
One thing I've learnt through COVID-19 is that we don't know anything about
So
the
you don't
future. So you can't know. But if you roll forward to March, obviously our focus at that point in time will be rolling out the vaccine, and that of itself will have another impact upon our experience of the pandemic. Ivan.
A few of our viewers who are watching this live right now, I know that you guys might have said it before, but they would like to hear something about South Australia on the border. Has there anything changed?
No, I'm not sure how many days South Australia is at the moment, but we continue to monitor South Australia. They haven't had any community spread since that initial outbreak. So we're still anticipating, I think it's around the 24th, 25th of December will be the time that we'll be able to reassess the situation in South Australia to potentially categorise them as a very low risk state, in which case they'll be able to join the other states in coming to Western Australia.
For Christmas, people from SA will be able to come here without any restrictions.
We're hopeful. I mean, obviously it depends on what happens there, and if they continue to have no community spread of the disease. And obviously the interaction between them and New South Wales is another factor we need to consider. But look, we're hopeful and optimistic that we'll be in a situation where we'll be able to categorise South Australia as a very low risk state, and then they'll enjoy the same benefits of movements that Victorians, Queenslanders, Northern Territory and Tasmanians.
So did you say that decision's made on Christmas on the 24th?
Oh, look, we'll make further announcements closer to Christmas.
Say that 28 days did land on
Yep.
Christmas Eve. Would you be willing to make a decision there and then, rather than have that buffer time that happened with New South Wales and Victoria?
Look, we'll make more announcements in relation to South Australia in the very near future. As I said, our focus to date currently is New South Wales. I think South Australia continues to make good progress, but we'll make some more announcements closer to those dates.
Would you prioritise those?
Well, look, I think obviously we'd need to be cognizant of the fact that that South Australia has done an outstanding job in getting that cluster under control, and that would obviously form part of the advice that we'd receive from the acting chief health officer on those arrangements. Look, and obviously if we can see a situation where they can join us, that would be a really happy one, and we'd love to be able to make that decision and announcement.
Can I just ask one more?
Rick.
The State Opposition has announced $27 million for a larger drumline network, a more sophisticated system. Do you see shark mitigation as being an election issue?
Look, obviously keeping people safe in the water is an important policy area, and that's the reason why the McGowan Labor government has put the measures in place that we have to understand the science better, respond better, and to make sure that swimmers have all the information that they need to keep themselves safe.
Could the opposition have a better policy here, or a better promise for WA?
I'll leave that up to others to assess. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.